You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, and the title of today's show is Don't Ask Me for a Title Again. You know my reasons. That's supplied by Scott on Twitter. Welcome to the Brazilian Grand Prix race review. I'm joining you from a temporary setup in the north of Spain, so apologies if there's any difference with the audio or the video. As I'm sure you can imagine, my wife was delighted that I took all the podcasting equipment with us on our travels, and even more delighted that I'm starting a live stream at 10:30 at night with children sleeping next door. So I can't be loud, annoying, and obnoxious this week, but I can be a bit quieter, annoying, and obnoxious. So let's get to it. I think we're going to have to ask a lot of questions about a very action-packed sprint weekend in Brazil. So we'll ask, does this weekend make or break the case against or for sprint weekends? Does this seal Russell's place at the top of Formula One? We'll ask, could Hamilton have actually won this race? And where on earth did the Red Bulls go? And I think the key question is, how come team orders have stopped working? We are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind permission of our better halves. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I'm joined from Brooklyn, New York by Matt Trumpets. Hey, Matt.
Whole season, 2 crashes, 1 brake fire, a red flag, but here we are. Mercedes won a race.
Oh, that did actually happen. Yeah, pinch me. So it did. We're joined by engineer Kyle Edgy Powers. Hey, Kyle.
Hey, mighty King George the Fast.
Hey, you've given him a title already. And from Denmark, we're joined by broadcaster and superstar DJ Kristian Pedersen. Hey, Kristian.
Good evening. I'm going to quote Carlos Sainz, who said, "It's been a great weekend for Formula One. And if I may add, to all you sprint haters," and I'm looking at some of the people on the Zoom call here, how about it?
Well, I mean, we could start with that as a topic. I did want to start with reasons Kyle is wrong about Interlagos in general. But I guess, does this make the case for the sprint weekend? What we've always said is that the sprint weekends have kind of either undone the mixed up grid from qualifying, or they've stolen a little bit from the Sunday. And I'm not a fan of sprint weekends. So Kristian, you can kind of, I guess, gloat for a second, because one swallow does not a summer make, but this was a complete sprint weekend package that was entertaining from Friday through to Sunday.
I think it was a lovely weekend, and I think the sprint race worked for once, but we also have to remember that when we're at the end of the season, things like this always happens when someone's won the championship and someone turns things down and others turns it up. And Brazil is just a track that delivers racing like that. So maybe it was a bit more track and season time specific than the actual racing, but I did thoroughly enjoy that race. That was good racing all along.
Kyle?
Yeah, I've been pretty outspoken about my views of the sprint races, and I do kind of stand by a lot of what I have said. It still challenges me as like a bit of an F1 purist as to how it fits, and if you can't apply it to every race, don't apply it to any of them. That being said, as Kristian said, all of the stars aligned and everything worked. It clicked. So the first sort of practice session was the only one they could change the setup, so that had some relevance. The qualifying, yeah, well, that was pretty dramatic, and thanks to the weather, I may add, made that good. And then we had a mixed up sprint race, and that was the first sprint race. That was the 6th sprint weekend, I believe. So that's the first one that's really delivered all the way across the board. And, you know, I'm all about, continuous improvement, and I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong. Am I fully wrong about the sprint concept? I don't think so. Did this one deliver? Absolutely. Just a bit wary it could be a false dawn, because I did think all of the stars aligned for it to deliver, but I ain't I'm not going to lie. I'm going to sit here. I was enthralled and glued to the TV throughout most of the weekend. So in that sense, this is the first one that's landed well with me.
I was torn yesterday because obviously the sprint race was exciting to watch and was a good quality bit of action with lots of people racing and lots of excitement. So I was torn between going, well, I hope the race is also going to be good because Interlagos does tend to deliver, but also wanting to be right about sprint weekends being rubbish. So I was a little bit on the fence. Matt?
Well, you'll be happy to know that having, what is this, the sixth chance to have an exciting sprint weekend versus how many qualifyings have we seen that were not necessarily the most exciting, that they're going to potentially be changing it next year and making the sprint race solely for points and having nothing at all to do with the setup of the grid on Sunday.
But isn't that just running the race 1.5 times?
1 1/3.
1 1/3. All right. Okay. I think that upsets me.
Yeah. So that makes it even more challenging for me. Like as it is, after watching that weekend, and you can say, okay, then they're not going away. Either make all of them sprint weekends and keep it the same format throughout, regardless of the track, or don't do them at all. The fact that we're going to maybe have some of them and then they're not going to count to set the weeks, that takes away one of the major attractions for the sprint races for me is as a staunch sort of stern critic of it, is it does make every bit of the weekend count. And each bit of the weekend has a knock-on effect apart from FP2, has a knock-on effect to the other part. Having it standalone just points and doesn't sort out the Sunday thing kind of counteracts that a little bit. But then also I don't like the fact that it can mess the Sunday up as well if somebody has something unlucky in the sprint. So I'm challenged on all fronts by it, but there's no denying that was an awesome weekend of racing we just got.
It was.
You may also add that a sprint is basically, as we talked about, a third of the original race. So if the original race is at a track like Imola, for instance, where you can't overtake, the sprint is just going to be boring. So I think you have to plan these sprints at tracks where you have a certain degree of certainty of good racing, or at least some action, so you can swap places in the qualification and stuff like that. When you have a possibility to throw balls in the air like that, I think it's good for the racing. But I see the problems as well, of course.
Well, the interesting thing is the argument being made as to why comes from, I believe it was Verstappen who was quoted in the press, but basically saying that drivers aren't really willing to take a lot of risks because they don't want to mess up their Sunday starting position. And if you take that away, then you'll have a much greater scrap on the Saturday, which I have to point out will still be for points that affect both the drivers and the Constructors' Championship.
So yeah, I think Carl's point was the stars did align, and I'm glad as an F1 fan because I'm not willing things to go wrong, but I just I don't want a couple of good sprint weekends in the row and them to go, yeah, it was always a brilliant idea when it's not something I want. But consistency across a weekend would let me have something to get used to. But like for example, this weekend I'm away with my family, so I didn't want to be watching F1 all weekend and not spending time with them. I nearly chose the Friday qualifying over the Saturday sprint race to watch live, which would have been a horrible mistake. So it's a horrible choice to have to make. But yeah, the qualifying was done in that traditional kind of drying track with a little bit of rain throughout the session. It was just perfect. It was that opportunity for tactics, opportunism, skill, and opportunity for Ferrari to be the only drivers out on intermediates on a completely bone track on the shortest grid of the year. So they got a chance to Ferrari. And while I remember it, on the sprint weekend, on the sprint race, Red Bull were the only guys out on the guys out on the mediums, I think, and that didn't work. And so Ferrari looked at that and said, "Hey, we're the ones who are meant to be on the wrong opposite tire." So that inspired them on Sunday to just throw on the mediums as well. But yeah, look, it's a great weekend, and I think if you are going to have these sprint weekend formats, you have to choose carefully the track that it's going to be on. And Interlagos is probably my third favourite track behind Silverstone and Montreal for different reasons. But the sprint track at Interlagos is perfect, Kyle. But I know you hate Interlagos. And so I just wanted to go through why you're wrong to hate Interlagos. It is like a top tier F1 track.
Context.
What's
I
going
do
on,
not-
Kyle?
Context. I need to defend myself. I've already been getting stick in the Slack live stream about this before I even said, no, I don't hate Interlagos. I love watching Formula One at Interlagos. It's one of my most looked forward to Grand Prix every single year. I hate Interlagos in the sim when I'm having to drive and race in Interlagos. I don't like it. I can't get on with the place. Yeah, turn one's, as you say, like turn one's really tricky. The final turn, there's no references. And it's one of those corners where you go through and you never think that you've got it right. It's such an unusual corner and you always exit it thinking, I've never got the line right. So personally, I don't like driving it in the sim, but I love watching Formula One there. So please don't get me wrong. And yeah, what a race it served up for us today.
Someone said online somewhere that DRS was too powerful here and that was a mistake. I'm not sure it is that. To me, it seemed like they can follow a lot better. So I think the evidence of that is not only did they get a good run down to turn 1, but if they didn't make it, they really did get a good run down to turn 4. And even it looked like, I don't think I saw any passes into that first right-hander, but it was threatening. So we were kind of getting there. And I think that shows a lot of the time that, you know, you can adapt the regulations and the cars around the historic tracks as well. But if you remember last season, only Hamilton with the super spicy engine really could get the overtakes done out of the final corner. Sorry, quick one from Kristian then, Kyle.
If the DRS doesn't work, or if it's magnifying overtaking possibilities, it's when you can do it on lap 1. In Interlagos, you had to do 3 laps trying, and then you can get it to work, maybe only in the second DRS zone. So I think it works brilliantly here.
Yeah, and for the actual racing, the track layout really does help and is sort of conducive to good racing, because you go into turn 1, you've got a big DRS zone up to it. You can have a massive lunge on the brakes for turn 1, but then if you get ahead, you're compromised. And then on the exit of turn 3, there's another DRS zone. And I don't know where the detection point is. It might be in the middle of turn 1 for the DRS zone going down to turn 4. So a lot of people will choose not to take the move into turn 1 to then try to take the move into turn 4. And the center S and the nature of the switchbacks, you can see people positioning the cars and getting them out of position, a bit like what Hamilton did with Verstappen last year. And we saw quite a lot this year as well, with people making somebody go defensive and essentially defend clear air into turn 1, which compromises them because they're trying to set the move up for turn 4. So we can see this high-speed game of chess play out, and this circuit is beautiful to display that.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I'll have a good time here. And I think maybe, you know, they can look at being a bit more adaptable with DRS. I would love to have seen what would happen if DRS cut out as soon as you were level, you know, wheel to wheel, side by side, level. It just closed. I don't know the mechanics of that, but if you could take away the DRS advantage once they were level, we would have had some really amazing battles into turn 1, turn 2, all the way down to turn 4. But as it was pretty good. I'm not complaining, but I think we need to move on to the big ticket item, and that is George Russell winning his first Grand Prix. So it's time to discuss where the race was won and lost. Well, you could argue that he won his first race yesterday, could you? Because it's sprint qualifying. Matt, it's a sprint qualifying. Now, I think this is right. The sprint race is technically a practice session, therefore not a race win.
I think qualifying is technically a practice session.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
I'm not sure the sprint race is technically a practice session because they're already in park for May. When they get there, I don't know. It's all... You know, they've done this thing, and honestly, I just can't keep up. I give up. Somebody knows the answer. You know where to email me.
I'm happy to say it didn't count yesterday. It didn't count on Saturday.
But, no. I mean, in George Russell's Wikipedia, does it say 2 race wins or 1 race win?
Exactly. I think it's going to be 1 race win. And look, before we put it in context of how he measures up against Lewis Hamilton or what that shows for that partnership, I just think, you know, in context on its own, Matt, from his journey through Williams, waiting, getting that substitute role, 1 race. How many races was Lewis out with COVID?
It was just the one.
Just the one, and then nearly winning that, but, you know, unskillfully letting his tyre deflate. Stupid George Russell in that race. But, you know, that's kind of over now. It's all in the past. He's a Mercedes driver. He's a Grand Prix winner. This isn't a fluke. This is the culmination of a journey.
It is. And if we're going to talk about his journey on the weekend, I think there's no better place to start than the third qualifying session.
Hang on.
Where
What? Which third qualifying? So Q3. Q3.
Yeah, Q3,
Okay.
third qualifying session, when it's all on the line and everybody is out there, including Leclerc for some reason on enters. So this sets him up to be at the front of the field for the entire rest of the weekend.
Well,
Because Leclerc held up, I think, Verstappen and Hamilton. Or it was, it was Perez and Hamilton got held up badly by Leclerc on the really slow enter tires. And then Russell, I know, off the track, thinks he's going to be clever, does his spin turn and buries his rear wheels in the gravel, brings out a red flag. Here comes the rain. And that's it. Kevin Magnussen wins. He's like, what, third?
Kyle.
Yeah, it was definitely Perez held up in qualifying by Leclerc. I'm not sure Lewis was. And this is one of my points of maybe where George, I think, got himself into a winning position, because he seemed from the start of qualifying just to have the slight sort of edge on pace, particularly on the first lap. So I think he was getting the energy into the tyres and firing it up, whereas Lewis seemed to really, really struggle. We saw it particularly when it was wet. Lewis basically had back up against the wall right to the final sort of few seconds of qualifying and managed to get himself out. So George actually got on there, got on with it and nailed the first lap and just seemed to have slight pace advantage to Lewis. And it's the first time we've kind of really seen that. And I picked up on that yesterday. So, and it wasn't surprising to see him hold on to it today.
Okay, so first opportunity to write Brit Bias, Lewis Fanboy, Cry More in the YouTube comments coming up from me here. But a slight mitigation to that is Hamilton often builds to the Q3 runs, and it's been a criticism of mine. He seems to go all out in both runs. You know, some people get a banker lap in, and some people and then go for it with the second lap. I don't think Hamilton ever does that, which means that he quite often, this has happened quite often in his career, he makes a mistake on the first Q3 run, and so it doesn't quite land, and then something bad happens, like Rosberg accidentally on purpose going down, the escape road at Monaco, causing a yellow flag. I think Bottas on probably the most blatant one. I can't remember what track it was, but he was in pole position and he had a little really harmless off that stopped everybody else setting a lap. And we know drivers do this accidentally on purpose. Not suggesting that Russell did this on purpose, but if you deny everybody else an opportunity to set a lap, it's got to be, Matt, it's got to be that has that demotes you. But
here comes the IndyCar rule back into effect, where if you do something like that, you lose your fastest lap. You don't lose all your laps for the session, but you lose your fastest one. And we've had this argument before, and apparently we're going to have it again. I personally kind of like the rule because it increases the risk for people willing to put it all the way out there. You can't just go, oh yeah, I'm ahead now. And it's the last 30 seconds of qualifying. I'm just going to drive stupid. And if I manage not to crash, I'll be even faster.
Carl?
Yeah. I think it's weird. What they do in speedway is like, if you bring out the flags or stop the race or quarter race flag, you're then disqualified. Like you're
from
out
that session.
You're out of it. Yeah, from that session. So that's kind of fair enough. Now, George, was it intentional? No. I think he's had his teenage boy in a Nova in a Tesco car park moment, tried to do a donut and tried to spin it and just stuffed it and end up wearing an omelette because of it. But yeah, should we regulate against this? Because actually, if you look into a bit deeper, if you look back at some previous incidents, which looked fairly innocent. I mean, everyone pulls up the Schumacher one and the Rosberg ones at Monaco for the big ones. But actually, if we saw, Alonso did this in Baku quite blatantly earlier on this year.
Allegedly.
We might be allegedly. We might be talking
Perez at Monaco.
We may be talking about that later.
We will.
Alleged, maybe. So Perez has sort of done it, and I think there's probably been a couple of others. So, as Matt said, it increases the risk and increases the iffiness. I don't know how they regulate against this, because as Matt rightly says, that's it. You've got your banker in, and your banker's good. You just go absolutely full bananas and just go for it. If it ends up in the wall, it ends up in the wall. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. I don't think you should penalise them. I think you should let it stay as it is.
I think if you have a sport where there's this much at stake and you have the possibility to have your co-driver drive into the wall just after you pitted in Singapore, or I mean, these things happen. They are the tools of Formula One teams. And if you give them the possibility, I think they will use it, and they will use it every time they can. Drivers individually as well. And I think it's better to not give them that opportunity. I totally understand it's purer without, but it's easier for everyone if it's not a possibility.
Yeah, and I think, let's move on to George Russell winning in the actual race, because he performed well in the sprint race. And I think in my mind, I really do treat this as one big race that gets kind of a random red flag in the middle. But over those two races, I think he did pretty well. Like, forget what happened to Lewis, forget what happened to Max. He can't control any of that. He went. I was looking at his lap times; they were solid all the way out through the race. He managed it all well. All the calls seemed to be, correct from the team and him. So I think if you go Saturday onwards, did he put a wheel wrong?
I don't know if he put a wheel wrong. I still don't know if, all things being equal, if it had been the two Mercedes without the collision, if we might have seen a different thing. And we'll talk about that later. But I do want to bring up right now the other really big thing that came out of the sprint race, which is we had Max on the medium tire, which I think was Red Bull trying to be very clever with their tire strategy, so they'd have two new softs for today's race. But I think it worked really against them, because he, in the cooler track temperatures, he couldn't turn the car in. He had the kind of understeer that my mom's station wagon had when I was a teenager learning to drive. It was spectacular. And he wound up, was it fourth, I believe?
Yes.
And only because Sainz had his penalty did he wind up promoted. But it put him in a position where he couldn't command the race from the start.
Yeah, and that was hard to predict. I mean, I think the last time I was on the podcast, I praised Red Bull and just said they just don't seem to get the strategy wrong at all. Now, on paper, I think they, in theory, did the right thing, but this is such a rare event where actually, yeah, as Matt said, it went against him. So when you can't turn the car in and you're struggling with understeer, you tend to put a bit more steering lock on, and the tires are slide. The sliding is causing graining and will just cause you more and more tire wear. So we're in the weird sort of the strange scenario where the harder tires wore quicker than the softer tires, and it just seemed like the only real viable race tire was that soft tire. So that was crazy and that was a massive shock as well for the sprint. So this just goes in with the stars aligning to make the sprint weekend really think was really exciting, because nobody could have really predicted that, and it is so rare for Red Bull to make a slight strategy error, because I still don't think it was an error. Nobody foresaw the medium being quite that bad.
No, but I will say, if there's ever a track you don't want to have understeer, I think Brazil would pretty much be it.
Yep, that's why I don't like it in the sim, because I can't deal with understeer very well.
Well, that's it, isn't it? That's it. It does encourage you to throw it into the corners and be very aggressive, which is why Hamilton seems to go well there. And I think I will disagree with you slightly, Kyle, when you were saying that Russell had the measure on pace of Hamilton. Looking at the lap times and the way the tyre stints went out, I still think on edge, on balance, and maybe if you want to account for some floor damage on top of that with Hamilton, it did feel like he had the lap time through the first stint. It did feel like he was able to make the tyres last longer. There was a big deficit to bring up, and obviously there was less incentive for Russell to push. But it does feel like, on balance, Russell was good enough to beat Hamilton over a weekend, but you could still see it wasn't like it was a romping, runaway, dominant drive within the team.
Yeah, I get that. And why I kind of say where I think he actually made the difference, and he actually outperformed Hamilton this weekend, was particularly the safety car restarts and particularly the last one. He put an instant gap into Hamilton, held on, and everyone knows that Hamilton was full wang. He was giving it everything, and he was really desperate to win in front of his adopted sort of home crowd. And he really, really, really wanted to win. And George managed to keep it cool, keep him in that DRS. And he had the measure of Lewis in the middle section, which is all about hustling the car and getting it through. And he seemed so comfortable. And I think it was Ted Kravitz or Karun mentioned on Sky that he was super calm on the radio. He had it under control, and he pulled a nice gap on Lewis. And that was surprising, because I thought Lewis was going to be absolutely monstering him. And another point in this, his tyres were actually 2 laps older than Lewis's. They'd done more previously before they'd put them on. So, because apparently Karun had gone in and said that George's had done 15 laps and Lewis's had done 13 laps in practice previously. When
I see.
They were both used sets when they put them on, but George's had slightly more wear on them. So that was really impressive in itself.
You definitely can't. You can't take away the fact that after the safety car, Russell was able to control that, and we don't know what it would have been like had Hamilton not had that collision, and that collision with Verstappen kind of robbed us of the direct comparison that we've been lacking, because we have seen Lewis Hamilton destroy Bottas, Kovalainen, Rosberg for many of the 3-4 year period they had together, but we've not really seen, Matt, Russell and Hamilton fighting toe to toe post porpoising.
Yes, we haven't. And if we're going to give points to George Russell, well, how about that first safety car restart, which absolutely caused the Verstappen-Hamilton collision to be a real thing?
Kristian.
I'm just going to add a little bit to the Hamilton-Russell thing before we get into the incident after the restart. So I monitored the laps, the last 6 laps of the race with Hamilton and Russell, and take into account that Hamilton did drive a car behind someone within a second with a little bit of damage. But still, during those 6 laps, they were constantly sector 1, 300ths. Russell was up. Sector 2, Hamilton down 110. Sector 3, Hamilton up 110. And that was 6 laps constantly, all within like a tenth. So they just basically did the same lap for the last 6 lap times for the last 6 laps. And I don't think there was any real racing going on, or they both went full on.
Okay, Kristian, do you think that, I think we don't really have enough evidence for this yet, but could Russell be the closest teammate that Hamilton has had on race pace? Because on qualifying pace, he's had loads of challenges from teammates, but when it's come to full race pace, he's been not really challenged.
100%. I think it's going to be one of his hardest teammates, not taking Alonso into account in those years, but I think they're going to be good mates. But he is so constant, and he did the same in the Williams, and he's just look at him when he won the sprint. He felt like crying, but he was like, I want to wait till tomorrow. I want to wait for the win tomorrow, or something like that. He was totally devastated today. This guy really means it. And I think he's as fast as Lewis Hamilton, but I think still Hamilton maybe have the edge on just experience, team, all that stuff.
But at some point, experience turns into being old. As
exactly.
Many people on this panel know. Not you and me, Kyle. The other two.
Too young.
I'm going to disagree.
No, you are old.
I think Rosberg is still the closest match to Hamilton on race pace. And I still haven't, over the course of a season, seen Russell's ability to care for tires in the same way as Hamilton's. And I will point to simply their medium tire stints.
Oh, yeah, Hamilton was much faster, yeah.
Where Lewis was clearly faster than Russell throughout that whole stint.
That's also why I'm saying he was once, when you're the car behind, you're not as fast. But still, I think Russell is up there, while I'll argue that Rosberg is no Russell. Rosberg had 4 years of practice, and he bet his life to win that title. And he had some luck as well. Yeah, he did.
Yeah, I know.
I think Russell is more constant by nature in his racing. And it's just my opinion, basically, because I don't know him, and he takes his shirt off and stuff like that. Rosberg didn't do that.
That's true. Yeah, so that's a point for Russell, I suppose. But we do get to play a game. It's not who looks best with their shirt off, because I don't want to play that game after a week and a half of holiday. But we will play this game.
Whose fault is it?
As we've alluded to, and of course has come up in our live chat, the contact between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen into turn 2, through the Senna S, and Verstappen made contact with Hamilton on the outside. So it was a tough battle, as Matt alluded to, that was kind of caused by Russell's start, and it was a good restart from Russell. If he'd have pinned it from the last corner, I think he would have got swallowed up, and that seems to be the way at Interlagos. So he's waited right until the finish line, which has left Hamilton vulnerable. Hamilton's gone into turn one, held a narrow line. Max Verstappen keeps some extra speed, kind of wall of death around the outside of turn one. In my opinion, seems to have kept his foot in, gone for a very aggressive move. Lewis Hamilton has defended very hard into turn one, and we need to bring out, I think, what's that clicker, the wheel clicker thing, to try and measure out whether there was cars widths or which part of the curb constitutes being left room. And I think, as Matt always says, you want to be left room on a part of the track that you would want to be left room. So you can't leave you room on a muddy bog, but you could leave them room on a curb. And I think that Hamilton definitely took that to the edge of the interpretation of what constituted leaving room. But when I asked my panel whose fault it is, where do we go first? Kristian Pedersen. Whose fault was that incident?
I'm gonna say it was 100% Max Verstappen's fault.
100%. That's quite high. That's quite a high percentage. Okay.
Yeah, I think he puts himself in a position where others have to leave him room, and I don't think that is racing. I know Brad will have my back on this one, and I think the race stewards for once put down a statement here saying this is not how we race, and he should have had the exact same penalty last year. And I think it's good for racing that we are not allowing this kind of racing, because you could just seen a still pic in our Slack chat here where you see how close the racing line is going into the corner, and you can't really judge anything from a picture like that. It's all about the entire situation. Verstappen puts himself in a situation just like Monza last year. He should have had a penalty for that as well. And I can keep on going. So, I think it was the right thing that happened.
So then I'll counter that, because I think the obvious counter there is, why didn't Lewis Hamilton just leave much more room on that apex to help avoid the contact?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
When you go as hot as he did into that corner, into corner one, Verstappen, he's going to have a little bit of understeer, and he's on the outside. So his traction down the hill is going to be worse than Hamilton's. And Hamilton is already turned in for his next apex. So when Verstappen comes in and disturbs his corner there, he's in a completely different driving line. And if Hamilton should have given him room, he should have backed off and driven away from the apex, which no driver will ever do. So Verstappen knows this, and he knows that is how you get them, by just shoulders out, but it shouldn't be allowed. And obviously now it's not.
Kyle, the steward. That's the point, Kyle. Is the stewards? I was quite surprised actually. The stewards applied a 5-second penalty to Verstappen, and this is very much in line with the new way the rules are being interpreted, which I love. I love the fact that we kind of get to play the referee now. So if we didn't have that steward's decision, I could look at the rules they've laid out and go, that's probably a penalty for Verstappen. And you can do that with the outside leaving room thing as well. But where do you stand? Kristian says 100% on Max Verstappen. What do you bid?
I agree with some of what Kristian said, maybe not all of it. And which
thank you, Kyle, for the things you agree with.
Yeah,
because I usually agree with everything Kristian says. Look, as a racing driver, when you're in a race, one of the most important things that you need to do, or you need to take into account, is self-preservation, is to keep your car intact and not get involved in crashes. Now, could Lewis have left more room? Yes. Would I have left more room in Lewis's situation? Absolutely. He, as you said, he pushed it right up to the limit of what you could and couldn't leave. And especially considering his opponent, and we can see there's still been a little bit of needle between them in their comments after the race, which I thought was a little bit of a shame. They both took a little bit of a pot shot at each other, to be expected. But
what was Hamilton's pot shot?
Hamilton's pot shot was like, well, you know what you get when you're racing Max, which is basically like he's going to do what Kristian explained was Max is coming through, or we're both having a crash, so you need to give room. And that's what he kind of inferred to and sort of referred to and said. Max said, I thought we could race well together, and he didn't give me room. Now, they both have a point in my eyes. So I thought the 5-second penalty was not harsh. I was surprised they gave a penalty at all. It's lap one. I thought that was a racing incident.
What?
And I thought it was a racing incident.
What?
It's lap one. They give him leeway on lap one.
There must be something with the connection.
It wasn't lap one. It was after a safety car restart.
Sorry, not lap one, but it's after on a restart where they generally give a bit of leeway. And Lewis could have given a bit of room. Now, why I think Max got the penalty and why, when you look at it in this context with the new rules, ironically, which were brought in because of, you could argue Max's driving in some of his and this sort of racing last season. Ironically, we've got these rules
specifically because of Max's driving last season,
right? Yeah. Reporting, and it's gone against him, and this is because I think the stewards took into account his angle, his trajectory going in, but also
Kristian was saying,
the speed that Max went in there at, and the fact that they both ended up completely off the track. Now, if Lewis had given him room, I'm pretty sure they both would have run off track. So Max was not backing off it. And Max fully expected Lewis to jump out of the way. Max was maybe just about going to keep the car on track, and Lewis would have been forced off the track. So I'm pretty sure that would have happened. And this is why Lewis didn't. Lewis thought Max was going to back out. I truly believe they both went in there knowing there was going to be contact. They both knew exactly there was going to be contact, and they both drove the same, and they were kind of both wanting to make a point to each other. So I was really surprised the stewards did actually penalise it.
But I'm definitely not weighting it as 50-50 as neutral as that, because I think your key point there, Carl, was it was the speed that Verstappen took in. So like the wall of death, and Kristian's got a great point about the angle, and there's a term in football saying, kicking it into row Z. And if you put another, which means when you loft it really high over the goal, and you say, well, actually, if there was another goal on top of that goal, he still would have missed. It still would have gone into row Z. And I feel like that's the case here. If Hamilton had left another car's width, I think Verstappen was still hitting him. There was a big overspeed. And if you look at the replay frame by frame, you can see the point where Lewis is slowing to take the corner, and Verstappen just doesn't. So for me, Matt, this is very clearly a two-footed lunge. He's got a yellow card. I think it's played out exactly how it was supposed to. He got more damage than Hamilton, so it's kind of self-policing in a way as well.
Well, if we want to talk about it, to me, there's a moment when you're playing poker and you've gone all in and your opponent's gone all in. You turn over the cards. One of you wins, one of you loses.
I like this.
Max lost today. Yeah. So if you're asking me from pure racing, like get rid of the rules for a second, pure racing today, yeah, they brought it on themselves. Each one made their bet and they waited till the seventh card was turned over and they put all their money on it. Max lost. Well, I see it as entirely 50-50. Lewis took a line that demanded Max slow way down. Max took a line that demanded Lewis back entirely out. And is it a surprise that they met in the middle? No, not really. However,
go on. Yeah.
However, we all know exactly what the rules of the road are, thanks to the FIA. And in that sense, it's 100% on Max. Lewis was ahead. Lewis left room on track, and Max clearly barged into him under that frame of reference. So in that sense, I do have to put it on Max. But in real racing terms, oh yeah, they knew it was coming, and they were there for that. This is what they've been waiting for all season long. Let's hit each other some more.
Mark says in our Patreon live chat, any other combination of drivers get through that corner without incident, except maybe Verstappen and Ocon. I love your poker analogy. I think it's a little bit more like Max went all in with a slight bluff, and he was relying on Lewis folding, and Lewis didn't fold. Kyle?
This is why I was sort of surprised Lewis sort of went into that position knowing full well, because, as soon as I saw Lewis squeezing him like that, in that split second, I was like, he's out the race. He's absolutely out the race. And I think he knew full well, which is why I mentioned the self-preservation thing. He knew Max wasn't going to back off and he was going to try and barge through, which is why with these two now, it's almost like it's not one-upmanship, but they're trying to make the point. Lewis got out of the way a lot last year and then didn't at Silverstone, and we all know sort of what happened. And then Monza happened, and I think now they're both going to refuse to yield to one another. Now Lewis has stepped up to refusing to yield to Max. Wow. Max is not going to change his way, and it's kind of this untenable situation now between these two.
Quick question.
So I'm just still surprised that Lewis did not give him a wide berth and just preserve his position there.
This is the question, though. Are you really saying right now Hamilton should have completely just steered out of where he was going and just run wide and all but let him through? Because Verstappen's angle if Hamilton had even slowed down or gone wider, he's probably hitting like the rear tires and spinning him out.
I think if he'd have left room, they would have been contact and he would have been shoved off the road. Then he would have moaned, and Verstappen should have got a bang to right penalty, but he didn't. And in the end, it's kind of worked out in his favour because it eliminated Verstappen from the race. But I think Lewis is trying to stand up to these situations that Verstappen's putting him in of I'm coming through or we're crashing. But in this case, Verstappen had almost got the move done around the outside. He was around the outside, and I think if both of them had given a little bit of an inch, if Lewis would have given a little bit more room and Max would have backed off a tiny bit slower, they would have got through there unharmed. Because it's them two, they were never going to come out.
Carl,
there
I just don't agree. You could have given another car's width, and Verstappen was still hitting it.
But it works with Lewis giving a bit of a risk and Verstappen not going in full wang. Verstappen coming off it and giving a bit. So if they both gave a bit, it would have worked.
Can I just follow the poker analogy? If someone goes all in all the time, every time, then you're gonna maybe at first fold, but eventually you will crack the style and you will hit back with an all in before him at the same time. And that is how racing works as well. And as we can see, Lewis no longer folds, and I don't think he should.
But I think hats off to the stewards there for enforcing those rules, and I think also hats off to those rules in the first place being implemented. I hope this is the beginning of more laid down rules that can be interpreted in a more consistent way. Red Bull, who have been wildly consistent this year, have been all powerful, have been dominant, possibly the most dominant car, one of the most dominant driver car combinations in recent F1 history, certainly. And the titles are all wrapped up. Max Verstappen is world champion, and Red Bull have won the constructors. So where did the form go, Matt? Where did Red Bull disappear to, and why was everyone so tetchy?
Well, you raised two different questions there. Where did their form go to?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one Friday practice, different weather, and tire strategy based on optimizing Sunday explains some of it. But I mean, surely Perez was nowhere near Russell's pace today. And he wound up on completely the wrong tire at the end of the race, unlike Max. So I think honestly, I think some of it was they were just caught out by things beyond their control. But I do wonder if they're not testing things for 23 already, if they're not looking at some of the changes for next year, making themselves a bit slower and getting some free testing time in during these last races. Because if I was them and I was looking at an additional reduction of my testing time, well, that's exactly what I'd be doing.
I think because they've realized that they've messed up the 2022 budget as well as the 21 one, they can no longer afford enough petrol for the race, and they're all on half loads, Kyle.
They're running lean.
Yeah.
They're running lean. There was this is another sort of point with the sprint weekend and why they are quite odd, because they have 1 hour to try to set the car up, and with that is a little bit of a roll of the dice gamble, an informed gamble of which direction to take the car in. And Max kind of alluded to this, saying, you can go several ways. We chose the wrong way with the setup, so they might have gone down the alley, and then you can't correct it. You can't do anything apart from just the electronic controls that are available to you with changing the diff on the mid and the entry and the exit, and that's about it. You can't really do much else apart from play with the diff and the front wing. So I think for once Red Bull dropped the ball slightly on the setup and didn't get it right. And that's hard. And that's one of the slight problems with this sprint format is you might have the best car, but then if you choose the wrong way on setup in the 1 hour session, or if something or something happens or it rains, you're screwed essentially.
Yeah, well, and I think it really does come down to that sprint race. I don't think they expected the medium tire to be that bad, but the track temperatures were really cool. I mean, it was 50 today on the track. It was 35 yesterday on the track. And I think that put them in a bad spot. And then the collision with Hamilton just kicked them to the back with the extra pit stop, and it was done. But if you look at Max's progress when he put that soft tire on, the new soft tire that he had specifically saved for it, because they were going to go soft, medium, soft today. There was no doubt about it. If you look at his progress on that new soft tire that only he had 2 of, it was clear they had today's strategy absolutely correct. And I think had he started at the sharp end and controlled the race, it might have been difficult for Mercedes to have actually won it.
I think the you've won the championship does a lot of things internally in a team as well. I think it's maybe a month ago they stopped developing and was full on next year's car. And I just think that vibe, you feel that in the team, there's really nothing to win anymore. So I think that affects everyone as well.
Okay, but that gets us on to, can we gossip? Can we gossip like school children? Do we have your permission? Because it did get very spicy and aggy, as we say in my part of the world. It got super aggy between Verstappen and Perez and all the race engineers. And obviously Perez was wanting on the sprint weekend to have them swap position because he needs points to finish as high as he can in the championship. But it didn't quite make sense on the sprint weekend because that actually determined starting position. So why would Perez, why would Verstappen want to give up, not just points, but also a starting position for Sunday's race? So that's okay. I get why they didn't swap there today. There didn't seem any reason to not just swap Perez and Verstappen to give Perez a few more points. And they did want to do that. And they said to Verstappen, well, go and see if you can get points and take points off of Perez's competitors, because that's quite a useful thing. I think the maths works out. The lower down Leclerc is, the more chance that Perez will close that points gap. But at the end of the race, there was no gap between Perez and Verstappen. So they just out and out said, please swap the positions. Please swap, give Perez that position. And Verstappen said, no, I won't. I've got my reasons. And this is where the drama unfolds and we turn all gossipy, because as the race tweeted out, the transaction between the two of them was really, really enlightening and in fact very, very surprising, because we've seen Perez be the perfect teammate, the perfect number 2, be very complimentary about the team, be an absolute 100% team player, never ever holds up. Verstappen defends very, very hard, and by the way, defended really well this weekend as well, defends very hard on Verstappen's behalf. But here's the exchange that at We Are The Race tweeted out. Said, Perez radio message at the end of the race. Perez, yeah, thank you for that, guys, thank you. Horner comes on and says, I'm sorry about that, Checo. Race engineer, we'll debrief everything afterwards. Perez, publicly on the radio, yeah, this shows who he really is. And I haven't seen any hint of this kind of butting heads at any point in the season between these two guys. But it seems like there is an ongoing beef about the Monaco Grand Prix, where Perez crashed in qualifying, as we mentioned earlier, which stopped Verstappen getting a shot at pole position, and that Verstappen has been holding that grudge all the way until Interlagos, which he deems Monaco to have been on purpose, and has held that grudge, and his revenge is not swapping P5 for P6 to help Perez get P2 in the championship. I think wow is the word, Kyle. Wow.
Yes. Wow. And why? It's needless. It's quite unsavory, but it's absolutely needless, really. You've got the championships wrapped up. You've dominated the year. Why now cause a controversy? It means nothing to you. I mean, you're not going to be on the podium. Just move over and let your teammate through, regardless of the little personal gripes you have in the background. Now you're sitting in front of the press, facing questions, and it's dragged all of this up, and you're washing your dirty laundry in public now, which people didn't even know there was soiled pants running around in like the RB garage, but now apparently there is, and now this is all sort of blowing up. And so apparently, as the rumors are going, apparently Perez straight up admitted to, allegedly, this is some rumors going around online on the Twitters, that allegedly Perez admitted that he did it on purpose.
No,
and this
really?
is why Verstappen's holding it against him.
Oh my God.
Crashing in Monaco qualifying, which again, even if that is the case, don't get revenge very, very publicly. This is
I
like
didn't know that bit.
He has taken like a leaf out of the Alonso book of sporting niceness.
Wait,
there.
So I didn't see this report that he has admitted it privately that he did that on purpose. And okay, and as a Perez fan, I will say yes, of course, it's legitimate. All drivers do that, and not something that I earlier in the show said should be punished very, very harshly. But that is incredible. I never want to hear tinfoil hat again when I suggest that a driver has done something deliberate to manipulate a certain situation, because we know this stuff happens. Matt, then Kristian.
Well, this is right. This is on a level of Rosberg turning up to the Monaco press conference and talking about the illegal secret tire test they did with Pirelli in terms of revealing dirty team laundry. Number one. Number two, problematically, if we had that red flag rule we were discussing earlier, this wouldn't be an issue at all. Now, would it? Because drivers wouldn't do that sort of thing because it would not pay off in the slightest. And number three, I'm actually now really concerned. I don't find the sourcing on this to be massively convincing.
No, fair enough.
Supposedly someone heard a thing from somebody else, but they're a name that we recognize. So therefore, perhaps there is some truth to it.
Okay, and the anger clearly from Verstappen kind of adds fuel to that fire as well. God, this is so gossip. I love it.
Yeah, but the thing is, it is total gossip, but it is now very public total gossip, and very public total gossip that I'm thinking is going to be hard for the FIA to ignore.
Good point. That is a very good point, Kristian.
And who made it public? Red Bull team themselves. And who had rival teammates publicly before Multi-21? Red Bull. Who am I always complaining about management-wise? Mr. Kristian Horner. I mean, this is basic management. You do not let your driver go rogue and run the team. The minute you do that, you don't run the team yourself. And this has happened numerous times in Red Bull. I know I'm a bit hard on Red Bull and Max Verstappen, but I mean, it's just...
No, I imagine in my head that Verstappen, with the protection of the people around him, with Josh Verstappen, with PK and whoever else is involved in his management, I imagine that he is untouchable at Red Bull. That's always the impression I've had. Like any other driver, you think if you just mugged off your race engineer publicly, you need to do this, please swap the positions. No, I'm not going to, because I've got my reasons and you know what they are. Any other driver, you get the hairdryer Alex Ferguson treatment, Kristian. So, I don't believe that will happen to Verstappen. I think he's bigger within Red Bull than, Ocon, who might get more of a dressing down. So Kristian, then Matt.
What I find most, what I find worst about it is, I think it's a shame for Max Verstappen, because just look at this year. He hasn't really had a ceremony for his championship. Things are just not running the way they should for a world champion. This is not how we should perceive Max Verstappen. This is not the things we should see or hear, and that is bad management.
All right, so I want to be really clear here. If we're going to talk about this, we need to be absolutely clear that it is not Max himself who said this out loud. He's not said this.
He said the "I have my reasons." He said the "I have my reasons" thing
from the Telegraph, which is a Dutch publication, saying this based on something he'd heard from another Dutch driver. Okay, so this is where this is coming from. So whatever you want to say about Max, he did not say this out loud on the radio. This isn't like, for example, I'll bring up Hamilton tweeting telemetry from Spa. This isn't that. Nevertheless, it does kind of make you think of Vettel and Webber a bit, and the Multi-21 and all the other clashes they had in terms of where they are in their career.
And I think, you're all right to mention that, the Multi-21 thing, which is 2013 Malaysia, and also the comments that it was Mark Webber made on the podium saying that Vettel will have protection from the team and that's normal, while the team just stood there and winced, and he said it very publicly. And there was no sort of disciplinary, nothing really happened. They had the meeting, as Christian Horner said himself. Webber walked out wanting to headbutt Sebastian, and Sebastian walked out saying that went really well. And they kind of left it at that, and that was very sour. If you read Webber's book, he goes into that in quite a lot of detail. It's quite interesting. But so this is almost challenging like that and saying, don't ask me again, I've already told you. It was almost a direct challenge of leadership in that thing, and very publicly, and it was very, very surprising. And what is Christian Horner and Red Bull supposed to do now? Because they've been directly challenged and overruled by their driver. Are they going to be seen to be spineless? I think they'll probably just wash it under the carpet, but tell Max privately, don't ever do anything like that again, because you are not bigger than the team. But it was a direct challenge of leadership, and really, really surprising. And it'll be interesting to hear what the actual real rumors are in 10 years when the book comes out, maybe, about it.
So to end this, I want to just read out a comment from Jose in our live chat, who says, I don't believe Perez could have crashed on purpose, but because there's no rule against it, I could totally imagine him commenting to someone in private, I knew I had nothing to lose if I crashed, so I just pushed like crazy, which goes back to the conversation we were having earlier. But we do have another Whose Fault Is It to play.
Whose fault is it?
Okay, everyone yelled at me in our WhatsApp group over this one because it is the Ricciardo Magnussen incident. So first off, I do want to kind of tip my hat to Haas, who managed, I think, to be the first team ever to get P1 and last on the grid as well, making a Haas sandwich out of the rest of the grid, which is really a great day for them. I think that is their first pole position and Magnussen's first pole position as well. So they've really had their kind of day in the spotlight, and that should have been rewarded with a Sunday Grand Prix pole position start. And it's a shame that it wasn't. The result would have probably been much the same. But this incident where it got punted from behind by Daniel Ricciardo, I think, first off, I would like Carl's perspective on this, because I think it's clear that, Magnussen was waiting on the throttle a little bit to try and get a good run at the car in front. So you could argue that that's slightly unusual. But my understanding is in those situations, it's always on the car behind. You can't anticipate someone pulling away from a slow corner. I think Luffield is notorious for this. But for you, that Ricciardo Magnussen punt, whose fault was it?
It's 100% on Ricciardo. He was kind of trying to say this in his interview afterwards, but not really saying it directly. He didn't really want to say it. It was completely his fault. It was a misjudgment. I think initially in the first split second of getting on the brakes, there was a gap. He wanted to go for the move. He immediately realized that wasn't going to work and then backed out of it. He'd safely backed out of it.
Yes.
And then he come off of the brakes again. Didn't expect the concertina, so it was just a clumsy run into the back of Magnussen. That was it.
That was the heartbreaking thing, was that he avoided the first crash, and then fully accelerated into the crash that he just avoided. Yeah,
indeed. And there's zero blame on Magnussen. I don't even think he was cutting back the corner particularly much. He had, I can't remember who was in front of him. I think it was a Ferrari he had on his front left wheel there. So he was just mindful of that. And you can't be thinking about what the driver's doing directly behind you. A little bit of Carlos Sainz in turn one in Cota. He was trying a massive cutback and George sort of went into him. This time, I don't think even Magnussen was cutting back. It was just clumsy and unfortunate from Ricciardo. But it was self-policing, wasn't it? Magnussen's tried to damage limitation, run back off the track, and then completely totaled him.
Isn't this the same corner where we saw Hamilton take Albon out?
No, it's
Am I misremembering?
Before.
That was the one before. But we have seen this before at Brazil, though.
Yeah, very, very Brazil-esque crash.
Yeah, because there's lots of slow corners where you can have differing approaches to when you kind of attack or defend, and basically if you're very close into one corner, it's going to foul you into the next corner. So everyone, especially on lap one, has their different opinions. And I just want to say, as some people in the live chat, Maria is pointing out, yes, I am getting a bit whispery because I can feel the telling off I'm going to get as it's nearly midnight here and the children are going to sleep. So apologies for that. Who was trying to come in? Kristian?
I was just going to say congratulations to Magnussen, because we haven't talked about this. I was actually going to say that's my first thing, but congratulations, Kevin, on the pole. And such a shame. It says so much about Formula One, the way you can go out of nowhere, just become the hero, and the next day
It's gone.
Zero
It's
lap
gone.
one.
Oh, I forgot
And
about
it's
your
just
Dane
a
bias.
horrible
Ugh,
feeling.
I'm sick of this Dane bias from
Listen,
Kristian.
Kevin and his dad, Jan, they are some of the greatest racing drivers in history. Listen, check out how his dad has been driving cars, and Kevin is as well. I'm not going to say they are Lewis Hamiltons or anything, but they are still among the greatest racing drivers.
Are we caveating Jan Magnussen as post F1 being a great driver?
Yeah, but just the way they go about racing, just the general approach they have, it's in their bones. It's so much in their bones, they can't help it.
Can I just back Kristian up there? Jan Magnussen pre F1 was tipped to be the next big thing. He dominated the junior categories and was the hottest thing. And when he jumped into that Stewart in 1997, unfortunately, for whatever reason, it just didn't work. I think he wasn't ready for Formula One and just couldn't get his head around it. So it's really nice to get Magnussen in.
There was also a few things. I think he got caught smoking behind the trailer a couple of times. And stuff like that. Jan.
Oh, we're into gossip again. So I think we're fully.
No, that's more than gossip. I think.
Okay. Right, I've completely lost track of where we were. Oh, yes, the thing that you guys got a little bit angry about was because I tweeted, "Oh, look, Kevin Magnussen after getting punted." Just accidentally, rolled backwards and precisely hit the person who had punted him. Wasn't that convenient? Because I have been taught by people like you and club racers and sim racers and karters that when you have a crash like that in the pack, what you should do is be as predictable as possible. And usually that is hold the brakes so that everyone can avoid you rather than you taking action. He let the brakes off. And the generous interpretation of that, Kyle, is that he wanted to get out of the way, but he just happened to revenge spear Ricciardo.
I think if he's managed to orchestrate that and build that up in his mind and his virtual rearview mirror in his head and take that out quite precisely, he is the greatest driver to ever sit in a vehicle ever. Like, that is incredible in that moment. What he was doing, if he would have held his brakes. Now, I'm one of the staunchest people online saying, hold your brakes in sim racing because it's so annoying when people are flying across the track. I think this is fair enough in this occasion. He's in his broadside in the middle of the track on it. This is the real lap one, isn't it? Yeah, this is like lap one, I think. Yeah, broadside, and he's got backwards momentum. He can see all of the cars in front of him are going to go in front of him. He's let the brakes off to get himself out of the track. If he'd have held the brakes, he would have been broadside in the middle of the track. Just so happens that it's a bit unfortunate that Ricciardo was the only one going behind him. I think that's coincidence. So I think we can give him a reprieve on this one, because in that situation, I think I probably would have done exactly the same. It's like, I need to get off the track quick.
I love how confused you are about at what point in the race it was. It's like, yes, this is part 2, lap 1. Sunday is how you have to do it. So Kristian, then Matt.
I think we need to talk about Ricciardo and how he is feeling right now, because I think Daniel Ricciardo is totally broken. You can just see it in his eyes. This might be his last Formula One race, next race coming up, and everyone's just going to remember what he's done the last half year, and that is such a shame, because remember a year ago, Daniel Ricciardo, everyone was like, oh, Daniel's there, it's the positive, win-win. Now, 1 year later, he's the one we're all going to wave goodbye to, and no one's really going to remember anything significant. I think that's a big shame, because if he's given me a lot of Formula One experiences and a lot of good racing and a lot of good just Formula One vibe.
Yeah, well, the only thing we really need to look at here with regards to whether or not Magnussen was quote unquote and intentionally aiming for Ricciardo is the fact that Magnussen's car was entirely undamaged. And he was just trying to keep it that way.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate for him that Ricciardo dodged right instead of dodging left, which is the only thing he couldn't have known when he looked up and saw the entire rest of the field flying at him on the racing line and realized his momentum was taking him exactly out of their way.
Okay.
If Ricciardo would put the brakes on or gone the other way, we'd be having a different conversation right now.
I know Kevin Magnussen didn't deliberately reverse his car into Daniel Ricciardo. All I'm saying is, if he was trying to do a revenge takeout of Ricciardo, that is exactly what it would look like.
But now you've said it.
Pot stir.
All right, let's let you stir the pot. Let's stir the pot against Matt, because there was another whose fault it was in the sprint race between the Alpine teammates where our friend Ocon ruthlessly did some imperceivable thing that I didn't notice wrong to Fernando Alonso. So, Matt, to Trumpets, completely unbiased, whose fault was that incident? And take us through it.
Are we talking about the first or the second incident? Because we have two to get through, really.
The one that where
the big one
run him out and basically Alonso smashed into him and broke his engine.
So that would be coming around, I think, the final turn. Alonso is behind him after they've had a bit of contact earlier on the exit of turn 4. Ocon, of course, having out-qualified him and having been fastest in the second practice. It's weird not to call it third practice. But yeah, they started side by side. And Ocon got the jump. They had some contact out of turn 4. And then coming around, Alonso got a really good run on him. And for some reason that I cannot figure out yet, drove into the back of Ocon. Smashed his rear wing, destroyed Ocon's floor, put them both really entirely to the back of the race. And lest you think I'm being biased here, Fred admitted himself that it was a, quote, misjudgment once he got to the actual steward's room where they had video and stuff like that.
But initially, like, he really politics all of this stuff. And it's not just a case of, oh, there was an incident and he didn't think he was to blame. He really has a kind of, and look, this is me liking Fernando Alonso. I think he's been great for the sport in racing terms. He lives and breathes it. He's passionate about it. He never wants to retire. So there's a lot to love about Fernando Alonso. But he does something that a lot of politicians I don't like do, which is it's almost like a God complex. He can never be wrong. It can never be his fault. And not only that, he then has to turn it around and blame the other person. Even though Ocon, think of poor Ocon. He didn't do anything wrong. He got hit. It ruined his sprint race. He then had to get a new power unit. And he had one of the most respected, experienced F1 drivers on the grid publicly dress him down, our friend. And so he had to be subjected to all of that. And I didn't hear a sorry out of any of that. I just, look, I'm going to say the word. I'm going to say the N-word. Fernando Alonso is a narcissist, and he displays that narcissism very publicly. Kyle, then Kristian.
Yeah, both of these incidents actually got my back up a bit yesterday, and particularly the radio messages. So, and some of the fan reaction that you see online as well. So first incident, in my opinion, it's not even an incident. I don't know why people are kind of getting funny about this. Alonso was behind. Ocon was on a tight line. He was trying to get up the inside. I think it was of Ricciardo and two cars. They were like 3 wide, almost going down straight. And he didn't, and he's gone out. He probably didn't know Fernando was there. Fernando's tried to go around the outside and put himself into a disappearing wedge. Now, we were talking about these new engagement rules earlier with the Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton incident. Well, in this case, Fernando was behind and wasn't, and by the letter of the rules, was not in any way entitled to any space if you take the wording of the rules, and then he's lost it on the curb and then he's freaked out at Ocon. The second incident, he's driven into the back of Ocon and broken his wing and then made some absolutely, quite frankly, ridiculous radio comments. And he knows their broadcast. He knows what he's doing. And for somebody who makes himself out as this strong, fighty warrior, the press game and the narrative he spins, he doesn't have to let himself get bullied a lot by nasty people in the team. And is
this is the other
victim
thing.
A lot.
Yeah, you're always the victim. I mean, that perfectly is in line with the kind of thing I was talking about.
And it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up to this whole rhetoric. And he knows. And then Alpine having to put up a statement to say the amount of abusive comments they got on their Twitter and actually said, we do not condone this. And the irony that it was all incited by their driver making radio comments pointed to throw ill feeling towards his teammate, calling him our friend, and then we've done this because of our friend. I just think Fernando's let himself down a bit there, in my personal opinion.
I have to admit that irked me as well, and possibly another reason why, maybe that some of that toxicity is caused by having live, almost in real time, driver comments for us. We have to sit and judge it as pundits because it's there, it's available, but that is part of the reason, and that will generate a little bit of toxicity. I'm glad you brought up the point of the new rules because I know some people thought that perhaps Ocon had pushed Alonso off track, but if you're ahead at the apex, you can do that as the inside car. You can move to the outside.
Don't get me wrong, it was rude. It was rude amongst teammates. Like don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Ocon is an absolute saint in this at all. It was rude, but it was like on the opening lap, he was on a tight, acute angle going in, and he was going to be running wide. And yeah, I don't think it was an intentional thing by Ocon. Yes, it was rude, but there's clear needle between those two. But yeah, Alonso getting frustrated with the first one it's just general frustration. But the fact that he aims it personally at somebody, he turned that frustration into and then misjudged it, and then admitted in the stewards room. The FA said it on the statement that Alonso admitted that he had misjudged it, but he kind of doubled down on throwing Ocon under the bus in the interviews after having seen it, which is what I found surprising.
Yeah, and I think that picks up on, if we're going to make a point about this, yeah, people say stuff on the radio in the heat of the moment, and then they come back and they're like, oh, I looked at the video and oopsies, my bad. He could complain about being put out on the curb by Ocon. That's fair enough. I think had he not lost control of the car on the curbs, we wouldn't have been talking about that at all, because he was initiating the overtake. So, if he decides to carry it onto the curbs, that's on him. But what's really interesting to me is that in the heat of the race today, we didn't see this now, did we, from Ocon when he was ahead? And you just want your heroes to do better than we saw from Alonso this weekend. That's all I'm going to say.
I'll just add a short bit that every time Alonso is leaving a team, something starts on the radio to mumble after the summer break, and then it just builds and builds and builds.
Yeah,
and it's
we've
just
seen it
the
before.
same story all over again, and I can't believe why anyone would want to sign this guy.
Time for champagne. The Brazilian Grand Prix, it had it all. It had fantastic racing action, and on several occasions it had drama that has turned us all into gossiping school children. Well, isn't Formula One as much about the drama as it is the racing? It seems to be these days. It seems to be much more of a water cooler thing for us to gather round on a Sunday evening and a Monday morning commute and listen to and discuss the things that happened in the sport. In the olden days, as I'm sure everyone on this panel will attest, you watched your F1 race, tried to talk about it to other people at work or in the street, and no one cared. So thank you all for participating, commenting, and enjoying Missed Apex podcast. If you would do us a favor and subscribe on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, and also make sure it's subscribed on a pod catcher like iTunes, like Apple Podcast or Acast or Pocket Cast, on your phone, and that makes sure you get the episode and you don't have to rely on me doing social media posts. We're coming to the end of the 2022 season. We will try and give you some good entertaining off-season content at least once a week, and I know we've missed a bunch of topics from this race. We're going to see if we can have some kind of pickup stream on Tuesday or Wednesday as well, and we will be here at 8 p.m. UK time for the Abu Dhabi race review on Sunday. So let's get to the awards as something to finish on. We do a good thing award and a bad thing award. Let's start with Kristian Pedersen. Hang on, there's a bumper. Look at that. I'm slacking because I'm on holidays, innit? So here's the good thing. Kristian.
I have a few good things. So I'm going to start with the first one.
Steal
the first
everyone's good thing awards. Go for it.
Spanos is in Spain with his entire studio, and his family is all right, and he's still alive. That is one good thing. Right?
I didn't get murdered yet, but I haven't.
And then, of
finished the
course, the Magnussen thing. It has to be my winner. But I wrote down three things of the week that is all puns and all with sexual undertones.
Okay.
So should we just run through them? I know I can see your face, Spanos. You hate it already.
Well, I don't want to be the guy that says don't be sexually explicit on my family-friendly podcast.
It's not going to be explicit. It's going to be within the curtains or whatever you say.
I've seen.
It's always the first one is. It's always great to see champagne-soaked where reveal the nipples of the team bosses.
Nope.
That is my first point. The second point is
not okay,
during Friday practice 1, the humidity was 69.
Okay, also not good.
Yeah.
But
and then the last bit is Alfa Romeo's car looking great, especially the wheels. You could argue they've done a great rim job.
No.
So, and
That's
that's it.
okay. Good. Well,
So,
you ruined the show
It's
forever.
just all done.
Kids,
I'll
if
never
It's
get.
not
That's
me
it.
this time.
kids,
It's not
That's
me.
it.
if you don't
I'm
get
sorry,
it,
done.
Spanners.
if you don't get it,
I can see the subs leaving.
if you don't get it, you weren't supposed to. And if you do get it, that's not my fault that you understand those rude things. I blame your parents. Kyle Power, who no, it's this good thing. Who good thing awarded for you? Thing had got.
So, so this is the good thing of the weekend. I'm amazed Kristian didn't take it, and I was fully expecting Kristian to take it, so I'm going to ruthlessly take it now. K-Mag on pole for the sprint race, which wasn't pole but is pole, but started at the front of the sprint race. Amazing. Their celebrations and seeing their celebrations in the garage when they realised and just how happy they were to see a backmarker team, which you could almost consider them at some point a kind of like a low sort of field team with probably arguably one of the smallest budgets, and seeing what it meant to them, and mechanics made it all worth it. I was having a little bit of a flutter watching that. That was about warm, fuzzy feeling territory, that was.
Okay, well, thanks for keeping it clean. Obviously, the standards between UK broadcasting and Danish broadcasting are very, very different. Follow Kyle Power at Kyle Power F1 on Twitter. Matt Trumpets, you are at MattPT55 on Twitter. Who got the good thing award for you?
Well, since Kyle ruthlessly stole my best moment of the season, which was my boy K-Mag getting his pole, because I have been a longtime fan of his, it is true. I'm going to go with the very obvious Mercedes getting a 1-2 before the season is out. I mean, this is kind of huge. We could talk about Ferrari a bit. We sort of didn't. They did a pretty good job despite all the things they did terribly. But really, I mean, it's spectacular that Mercedes gets a win. They get a 1-2. And if we're looking ahead to next season, well, then this is what you would like to call a very positive sign for what we're going to get next year. And I'm already kind of excited about it.
Are you implying that Ferrari accidentally did quite well and then giving them praise for that?
I would say that despite all their best efforts, Ferrari did extremely well, and were it not for a tear-off in the brake duct of Carlos Sainz, which made him convert to a 3-stop strategy, we would have had a potential real fight between two teams for the win of the race.
I'm glad you mentioned Mercedes, and I'm going to go for the two Mercedes drivers. I think first off, obviously, George Russell for claiming that first Grand Prix victory, and you know, like I said, it wasn't a fluky, mixed up conditions win. It wasn't a 2012 win where everyone's winning races and everyone gets their turn. This is a season where only Ferrari and Red Bull have won a race, and then Russell has come in and broken that in the 34th Grand Prix of the season. That is no mean feat, and you have seen it building. You've seen the control of strategy that he has in the car. You can see he's really thinking. He's made a lot of decisions which didn't go well, that didn't go to plan, but it seemed like today he was in control. He knew that they needed to go long. He understood when they needed to adapt and change that strategy, and he had the raw pace to be competitive. So thing of the weekend one to George Russell, but also I think Lewis Hamilton too. He could have challenged much better for this race had it not been for a few things out of his control. Qualifying, getting ruthlessly wiped out by Max Verstappen, which, well, my opinion was that it wasn't his fault. And also, I think we didn't mention it in the bulk of the show, but he really wanted to stay on those medium tyres. And I think the assumption was that he just thought he had the pace, or that he was trying to one stop. I think he was trying to stay out for a safety car. And we saw George Russell do that on 2 or 3 occasions this season, going, no, I've got enough pace, not the pace to keep up with the people undercutting or new cut tyres, but I've got the pace to stay in the game. And if a safety car comes out, I'll have a big advantage. And actually that was the correct call in hindsight, because of the Norris virtual safety car, then safety car. That probably would have been enough to put Lewis Hamilton up to the front. So a lot of positives to come out of this weekend, and of course the Brazilian Grand Prix itself. But let's stop all that silly positivity and do this award. It's the
Oh Oh no, you missed the apex.
It's the oh no, you missed the Apex award. And I've just realised that, like, as my son's voice is breaking, that we might have to update that bumper now. But who missed the Apex for you, Kristian?
I think it's, let me phrase it like this. I would say the champion didn't act champion-ish,
Okay.
I would say. Yeah.
So Max
That's
Verstappen
my
misses
missed
the
the
Apex
Apex, yeah.
for you. All right. And Kyle Power, who missed the Apex for you?
Well, that was going to be my one. And I would like just to say, even though I threw Fernando Alonso under the bus, we kind of have to acknowledge that he was probably my driver of the race. Like he had a stunning race today and came through. And where did he finish?
P5. No, it's
Was
too
it
late.
P5?
No, it's too late. Spain hates you already, Carl. It's done. It's too late.
But no, so that was going to be mine. So now I've got to think of one on the spot. Ferrari juggling buttered covered balls again. On their strategy with the qualifying, leaving
The
Leclerc
enters
there.
on
And
Leclerc's car.
yeah, the inter. And if you hear the radio going on, he's like, guys, what's going on? What are we doing? And the engineers sound so unsure and so hesitant. It's like they're completely devoid of any process or procedure to follow. It's like they don't know. They're kind of making it up on the fly. And then when they put the tires on, the dry tires, he's like, guys, these are not new softs. Change them. And then there was just complete confusion. It was absolute chaos. It was shambolic. So that's my, I think, Ferrari strategy and general team operation missed the apex for me.
It's almost as if they're not empowered to make the call, and they know they're going to have the cover to make that call. Matt?
Yeah, well, before I give you mine, I just want to get in on that lap on the inters, the out lap. He's like, what do I do if it's not raining? What do I do if it's not raining? What do I do if it's not raining? And he's like, okay, I'm going. It's your last chance. And he drives by the pit entry, and then they say, oh, box. And he's like, well, I think I'm going to finish this lap now.
Savage.
It's just like madness. For me, Red Bull. And I don't mean the team stuff. And I just mean like in general. They got the setup wrong. They got the strategy not right for the sprint race, even though they were aiming at Sunday. And then the culmination for me is Perez winding up on that medium tire when everybody else had softs to be on. I think they just they were off this weekend. For what reason, I don't know, but they were very, very clearly off.
Oh, good. No one took mine. That's good. I'm going to give it to Yuki Tsunoda for having absolutely no idea where in the queue he was supposed to be, and then randomly just stopping in the middle of the package, going, "No, I'm just gonna chill out here. No, you guys carry on," and then moving out of the way and making things very interesting on the restart. Thank you very much to my panel, Kristian Pedersen and Kyle Power F1 and Matt PT55. Check out the links to all their social media in the show notes below. Follow me at Spanners Ready on Twitter. I'm the best one, after all. Or on Facebook, you can search for Richard Reddy. And if you really do enjoy Missed Apex podcast and you want to encourage this kind of thing, why not be a patron? Patreon.com/Missed Apex. We might see you midweek. There might be a patron-only stream where I might tell people about my adventures. That's a good idea, Matt. Should we do that? Should we tell people about my adventures?
I think we could do that.
Adventures in Europe. But we'll definitely be here for the Abu Dhabi race review next Sunday. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. Whispering. Let's see how much trouble I'm in.
Comment of the week.
Well, it's that time again. And we are up first with our friend Maria Klados. There is our answer. Mercs ditched their side pods to avoid damage when racing with Max. Finally, it makes sense.
Just make the car as small a target as possible.
Our friend EJ is in with every F1 track should just be Interlagos in different countries.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Wes wonders why didn't Magnussen get a meatball flag before he hit Ricciardo?
Just in case, just issue a preemptive one.
There just wasn't time, honestly. And finally, our friend McLaren Speedmark is in with, everyone needs to remember that the Italian media are actually in charge of Ferrari, a point which is both valid and vaguely hilarious.
That's not that much of a joke, I don't think. Who's your winner, Matt?
Oh, it's a difficult one, but I think Maria Klatos has to win. For there is our answer. Merc stitched their side pods to avoid damage when racing Max.
Comment of the week.
We're out of here. Thanks for hanging out. Goodbye, guys. Thank